for the kind invitation, for inviting me along to speak today. I have come down from Edinburgh and then I'm running back away in about an hour to speak at another conference tomorrow. Although I've already had my first I'm Scottish in a different place experience when the taxi driver said, "It's a bit cold out, isn't it?" And I went, "This is summer." So thank you again from Advance HE for inviting me along to speak. As has been said, I have the privilege of being director of an organisation called Equate Scotland. And usually when I'm at an Advance HE event in Scotland, I say that and everybody knows what it means, but I'm around an entirely different audience, so I'm going to give you some context on who on earth I am and what on earth I do. So Equate Scotland has been working since 2006. We are Scottish Government funded, as well as being funded by different industries and different sectors, to work on the underrepresentation of women in science, technology, engineering, mathematics and the built environment. So I'm talking about women in STEM, at which point you all know and understand what it is that I'm talking about, because there's no way that you haven't had all these conversations in this room many times already. But in the time that we've been working since 2006, we've become the national expert on this issue. Now, I'm not saying that Scotland has all the answers. It doesn't. You can just take a look at the data and you'll find out that we don't, and there's a lot of work to be done. But we are far progressed in the number of interventions that are taking place both in the industry and across the education, further and higher education sector. I think we're at the point now where I don't have to knock so hard on the door to be answered and have a conversation about women in STEM. Go back a few years ago and I was knocking on the door, thumping on the door, trying to kick down the door, and possibly somebody answered. But I think we've come a long way in particularly the last 5 to 6 years. The work that we do at Equate Scotland is in 3 specific areas. The first is with women who are working in the sector and students, women students who are studying STEM-related subjects. We have the only national network of women in STEM students. We provide development opportunities, we provide placements, we give them a network, especially when they might be the only woman who is studying mechanical engineering and has a lack of support within the classroom. That's what we do, that's what we provide, and we have champions in different universities and colleges across Scotland. We work with women in the industry themselves because we want to keep them there. That small number that we have, we're desperate to keep them in STEM and having a good experience. And by doing what we do with them is CPD opportunities, leadership opportunities, ensuring that they have access to flexible work and helping them when they may be encountering microaggressions, sexism or more within the workplace. One of the things that I get asked to do, both by women students and by women working in the industry, is assertiveness training. Yeah? I'll get asked this usually on a kind of monthly basis. Can we do assertiveness training, confidence building training? And I come at that with hesitation, because what that means is we're approaching the issue with a deficit model. We're approaching the issue and saying that there is something that women don't have, and if they had it, and it was confidence and assertiveness and communication skills, that gender equality would vanish. So we've made women the problem rather than the solution. And the reality, of course, is that for the future of economic growth in STEM, women are the solution, not the problem. So we come at it with an asset model, which is why we need to work with industry rather than working with individual women. Because I can give women all the assertiveness and all the confidence that I can, but if they go into a workplace which is not made for them, if they go into a workplace which doesn't want them, then they will leave that sector. It's why I'm a little bit anti-lean in. If you've read the book, we can talk about it later. So that's the kind of work that we do. But it matters for the sake of women's progress, and it matters for the sake of the future economy. Scotland, indeed the whole of the UK, wants to be a global leader in technology, in engineering, in life sciences. That's not going to happen if it's isolating 51% of the population. It's simply not going to happen. If you want to have innovation, if you want to have productivity, if you want to have profitability, you need to have diversity of thought, you need to have diverse people around the table. I'm going to be interactive here, but you don't need to worry. I'm not going to get anybody to stand up and do any role playing. That's what your workshops are for. Can you put your hand up here if you have an Apple product? Yeah, they really are winning, huh? Okay, so in 2013, Apple produced the Health Kit, which is an app where you can track every part of your well-being. It's that little white square with the heart on it. Nod if you know what I'm talking about. Great. And they produced it in 2013, and it was marketed as this app that can track every aspect of your key health and well-being. We're talking about cholesterol, sugar intake, calories, steps. What do you think it forgot in 2013? Menstrual cycle. I did this at a tech conference with about 75% men, and I had a really good time doing what I'm about to do with you now. I want you to say periods after 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. So the reality is that when Apple produced that product, it had reputational damage. There was loads of blogs about what it hadn't included. It created economic damage because then they had to put out 2.0 a lot sooner than what they thought they would have to. Diversity means a lack of innovation, a lack of global thinking, a lack of lived experience. And that is just one example, a very acute example of how that happens. You won't be surprised to know that it was a male development team in Apple. So these are some of the issues as to why it matters. The stakes in Scotland are that we have 23% women working in technology, we have 9% women engineers, we have 30% women working in life sciences, and we have 2% working in built environment and construction. We have a long way to go to create parity there. But the work that you'll be most interested in is the kind of third layer of work that we do, and that's with education. That's with further and higher education institutions in Scotland. And we have some of our best partnerships with the education sector. And I'd like to give you 2 examples of the kind of work that we've been doing. The first is with the Open University, who we've been doing work with for the last 2 years, and it has been phenomenally well received and has had impact, and we're seeing the evidence of that now. The key area we've been working on is marketing for them. How do they market STEM-related courses to women to get them to want to engage in this? Has there been gender bias in the language that they've been using, whether online in their prospectuses in the classroom? So we've been reviewing that with them, and as a consequence, they've changed their guidelines, they've changed the wording that they're using in order to hopefully attract women and also men who don't fit a patriarchal, traditional mode of masculinity, which we all need to veer away from. The second is with West Lothian College. West Lothian College have made a commitment that by the end of the next academic year, they want everybody in the college to be trained on equality and diversity and unconscious bias. Now, that isn't just those who are teaching, it's absolutely everybody. And I had one of my best training sessions in this job at West Lothian College when they had people who were catering staff and lecturers in the same room at the same time talking about equality and diversity. Understanding that everyone plays an equal role in the culture that you are creating in a campus, I think is critical, hugely critical. We ended up having a conversation about portion size and how they realise that they have been biased in giving growing, strapping lads larger portion sizes than girls who probably don't want to eat as much. I've never come at it that way. I'm not personally one of those girls, but the fact that that conversation was happening in the room was brilliant. It was absolutely fascinating and brilliant, and it was just another part of the work that we do. And it's something that I would really encourage you all to pursue as well. So our work with institutions tends to be around training, it tends to be around development. We do consultancy work, one-to-one, whether it is now that you've produced an Athena Swan application, you need to follow through and do some work on it. Yes, we can do that with you. And it's that kind of flexible, fluid relationship that we have with universities and colleges that means they are some of our best stakeholders and are making, I think, the most impact in this area. Many of you will know about gender action plans that are happening in Scotland. If you don't, I'm going to give you a whistle-stop tour of them. Essentially, gender action plans are required by every university and college to be designed, published and acted on in an attempt to have at least 25% of any gender in a concurrently gender-segregated course. So, for example, at least 25% men in nursing by 2030, at least 25% women in engineering by 2030. So you can imagine that has also been a key impetus for them to get involved in the work that we do. But one of the key parts of the Gender Action Plan is, one of the pillars is supporting success, it's called, which is supporting students to then continue on into the industries where they have been learning qualifications to be able to be in. Now, this matters hugely in Scotland, given that 73% of women who leave with a STEM qualification do not stay in the STEM sector beyond middle management. 73%. So that small number that we have is dropped by a further 73%, causing huge talent loss, huge economic drain. And imagine the innovation that these women could bring to the STEM sector. So it's at that point where universities and colleges, particularly in Scotland, have quite a big role to play, not just in what's happening on the campus, not just what's happening in a degree or a course, but what happens after those qualifications have been gained and are being used within the sector. In terms of business and industry partnerships, we have a fair amount of support from industry. Well, fair amount. We have some support from industry. And interestingly, we tend to have support from industry where there's a really enthusiastic woman who has had lots of experience and lived experience and doesn't want to have it happen to other women. So they engage with us and they work with us. But there is a role to be played by industry in a more proactive way in partnerships with higher education institutions, with universities and colleges. And a few examples I'd like to share with you. We have a summer paid placement service that is for women only who are studying STEM qualifications. And we do that in collaboration with a whole host of employers, Scottish Power, EDF, the Forestry Commission in Scotland, including the Scottish Government, a whole host of employers. And we work with universities and colleges to help them promote these opportunities from the day that students get into a course. Because in our research, over 60% of women who are studying STEM wanted to see placements as a core part of their curriculum to give them the confidence to remain in the sector long term. One example of the partnership that we are pursuing, both with industry and with education. Another is with Dell and University of Strathclyde and the City of Glasgow College, where women role models who are working in digital technology in Dell partner up with first-year university students or new college students and become one-to-one mentors with them throughout the first year of their course, again, giving them role models, letting them see what they can aspire to be, and hopefully keeping them in their course and keeping them in the sector. So the industry and education partnerships can be very real and can be very impactful. But that comes with a caveat, because I think industry has more to learn from the education sector than on ED&I than the education sector has to learn from industry. So there is a space in which actually I think universities and colleges can be reaching out to industry not just for their students, but to actually teach more about how education, how equality, diversity and inclusion can happen in real life, in practical terms, in industry. We're doing that at Equate Scotland, but we are but one organisation and we need many more talking about this with industry. So whilst I was originally asked to come along and talk about business partnerships with industry, yes, to an extent, but business actually has quite a lot to learn from universities and colleges in terms of ED&I. One of the things that I focus on quite often when I come to these kind of conferences is who is doing the equality, diversity and inclusion work. When I talk to universities and colleges in Scotland, whether it is the Gender Action Plan, whether it's Athena Swan, what I notice is that it is those staff who are women, who are disabled, who are Black minority ethnic, who are given their time to these activities, these interventions, and it's quite right that they are. I keep going into that, sorry. It's quite right that they are because they're providing their lived experience. But one of the things that I question is, are they doing that above and beyond their work? Are they often doing that for free? Are they often doing that in a voluntary capacity? Are they sharing emotional labour to be able to get the university or college to a bronze, silver, gold, whatever it might be? And I come with a bit of caution to that, because that actually exacerbates the issue of inequality. And what needs to happen is those people who are working on ED&I need to be given the importance and not just importance, but also the financial remuneration for the work that they are doing on ED&I, for it to have equal status and be taken seriously by all as well. When I talk to industry, I often say that equality and diversity shouldn't be happening by HR over here. And I say the same thing to universities and colleges. It's not for HR over here. It's not for a support team working in isolation over here. It is everybody's responsibility. That means in the classroom by lecturers. That means those that are providing career guidance support. That means people in leadership positions. That means front-facing staff. It is everyone's responsibility. And until equality and diversity and inclusion are embedded into everyday practice and are part of everyone's job descriptions and competencies and promotion opportunities, it won't become the norm. It won't become culture change if it remains out here with this committee doing this work and being celebrated in isolation. It has to become the norm across the board. And I see this in industry all the time. I usually see it in industry when I get a phone call to say, could you come along and give us some unconscious bias training? And then they ask, how much does it cost and how long will it take? And the response is, that's great. Could you fit it into a 45-minute lunch session and cure us of bias? Now, I'm good, but I'm not that good. Okay? That, to me, is a red flag when I talk to anybody, because what that's saying is you need to tick a box somewhere and say that the training has happened. Culture change, attitudinal change happens because you invest in it in a long-term way. It doesn't happen because you went to an unconscious bias training session once. It happens because you repeatedly checked your behaviour, you questioned your decisions, you felt able to be an active bystander and do something about something that you heard somewhere on campus. Changing behaviours doesn't happen in a session. And yes, I do unconscious bias trainings, but the last slide of the unconscious bias training session is, you can't now say that you're not biased because you had unconscious bias training. That's not how it works. And in the same vein, whether it's a university, college, or industry, long-term strategies are needed, investment is needed, and it needs to be everyone's responsibility. I talked about this, and this is one of the things that I talked to Gary about previously. One of the things that I am most passionate about, which will come as no surprise if anybody has decided to follow me on Twitter, brackets, I apologise, is intersectionality. So intersectionality is risking itself and becoming a bit of a buzzword in the way unconscious bias has been for a while. Intersectionality is not something to be performed. Intersectionality is something to be embedded. It's something to take seriously, not something to tick a box over. It should be hard because it's a difficult thing to get right. And it's not something that you're going to come to the end of. It's something that is continuously being worked on, shaped, and improved. The purpose of intersectionality is not merely collecting data. It's about changing mindsets, changing attitudes. It's about talking to those people who don't usually get talked to and engaging them. I was listening to somebody give a speech a while ago, and they used the term easy to ignore rather than hard to reach groups, and that stayed with me. It's those who are easy to ignore and who are further away that we need to start working on, not just the lowest hanging fruit. I often wonder if we had considered intersectionality when we first started talking about widening access and widening participation, how much further forward would that agenda be right now if we had talked about it and come at it with an intersectional approach? If we consider intersectionality and we think about students of colour, staff of colour, we think about disabled students and staff, we think about LGBT students, we think about carers, we think about single parents. We are thinking about our student base, our future leaders of tomorrow, in a way that is more relevant to them and means we are more likely to engage them, not just in their future careers, not just in their education, but also in their ability to be good managers of people tomorrow. And that's something that we at Equate Scotland have been working on. We worked with 180 students across 2 universities in Scotland, Strathclyde University and Edinburgh Napier University, on a programme called Confident Diversity. And the purpose of this programme was to embed just a little bit, we managed to get 2 hours in the curriculum for a year, embed a little bit of equality, diversity and inclusion work into a 2nd and 3rd year engineering course. There was 180 students involved, and it was 2 hours of getting them to question inequality in a way that made sense to engineering students. So let's think about an engineering feat, and how would it be improved if we thought about equality and diversity? How will you be a manager tomorrow if you are not thinking about how different people work in different ways? As a consequence of that, after the 2 hour sessions, we went back and we had a conversation with the students. We did research, we evaluated what they thought. And just with 2 hour intervention, 80% of them felt more confident about talking about equality and diversity and understood why it mattered in relation to their degrees. Imagine if we did that as normal, standard practice across STEM qualifications, not just in Scotland, but beyond. The reason that matters is those students who were a majority of men, I could count on not quite one hand, but 2 hands, how many women were in the room, women students were in the room. But these are the students who are going to be people managers tomorrow, and these are the students who, if we talk about equality and diversity in their courses now, we get them to think about these things, not just for staff to think about them, but for students to have a sense of responsibility around this. We could transform the industry in much shorter time than it takes me to go around doing unconscious bias training for every single person working in STEM in Scotland. In terms of where we can embed equality and diversity, a lot of the time we talk about marketing, we talk about opportunities for role models, but there's also a lot of examples of curriculum design thinking about intersectionality and equality and diversity. Whether it's in a project like what Equate Scotland has produced, whether it is in an academic that I was helping gather equality and diversity related statistics to use in a mathematics course, whether it is an academic in computing studies in Dundee who has made sure that her reading list has 50% women on it, to try and get them to be thinking about and embedding, I guess it's equality by stealth, in the everyday work of a university or college course. So those are just a few examples that we have been working on at Equate Scotland and in universities and colleges across Scotland. But equality and diversity matters in terms of how we market things, what we teach, who engages in decision making, who is speaking up in a classroom or who is not speaking up in a classroom, who our student representatives are and who's engaging in the wider culture of a university or college. And it won't happen by accident, it has to happen by design. The last thing that I want to leave you with, because I've been going on a bit now and I did say it was only 20 minutes. The last thing I want to leave you with is Equate Scotland implemented a Women Returners project last year, which is getting women who have left the STEM sector back into STEM sectors at level playing field from where they left previously. Now, they left because they will have had negative experiences. Some of them suffered maternity discrimination. Some of them felt unable to come back due to work-life balances. But that group of women, of 40 women, 25% were women of colour, 40% were older women, and half of parents were single parents in that small group. That's because those women are the furthest away from access to opportunity, and it was our duty to find those women and ensure that we were making investment in those women. Intersectional practice and equality and diversity doesn't happen by accident, it happens through purposeful design, and it's our duty to implement it wherever we can. Thank you. I'll open it up to questions now. I'm chairing myself too.
Russell Thomas from Exeter University. When you were introduced, they said something about sexual violence. I'm sure I mentioned. Yep. You didn't mention that in your presentation. Could you talk a little bit more about it?
Sure. One of the reasons why I didn't mention it is because that's a former job that I had, not a job that I have at the moment. So Equate Scotland doesn't work on gender-based violence or in sexual violence. That work is happening through NUS Scotland. It's happening with the Rape Crisis Scotland, Scottish Women's Aid, and Equate Scotland doesn't actually work on that issue. We support it where we can and promote the organisations that are working on it. My previous work was specifically tackling men's violence against women and looking at lad culture, so-called lad culture within universities and colleges in Scotland. And I was working with mainly training young men and men and women who are working in the justice system in Scotland. So not quite higher education, I'm afraid. Any other questions? I can tell a cheese joke while you think of things.
Hello. It's not a question, it's a comment on something that Talat was saying. I think that she was talking about partnerships with industry. I think it's also worth remembering that universities are huge employers in every city. And so things like the women returner placements, we've had women returner placements into our IT department. So remember that your institution is a large employer that can engage with programs like this if they're available in your region, and we've had women returners working in our IT department and have gone on to offer them jobs in IT tech careers in Scotland.
Yeah, absolutely. And our undergraduate placements can also be held within, research projects that are going on in universities and colleges. So it's quite right. You are also employers. You are microcosms of society and culture yourselves. So there is a responsibility there that's beyond simply students as well. Any other questions, or do you actually want the cheese joke? I can give you the cheese joke. Do you want the cheese joke? Yeah, okay. What kind of cheese do you actually have a whole lot? What kind of cheese do you use to get a bear down from a tree? Well, you're not meant to shout it out. It's all I've got. All right, let's have a question.
Hello. Hi. I'm Julia Davey from Plymouth University. I was quite interested in when you were talking about trying to encourage school children to study into STEM subjects. And we've, our health professions and medical school have just set up or sponsoring a sixth form college. But even at that stage, making choices at age 15, 16, the nursing programs at that sixth form college are they're 100% women. And then the medical areas are predominantly male. So at what age can you or us or any of us influence that whole cultural change in schools? Because it seems that there's those sorts of career occupational segregation decisions are made at a really young age, and I'm not sure that we're necessarily getting to, the importance of getting to the young children.
Sure. The reality, of course, is that gender stereotyping starts not even from birth, it starts in the womb. And the way in which we narrow down choices of girls and boys, it starts from such an early age. The reality of that means that it's pretty embedded. A piece of research that we quote quite often is by the age of 6, girls stop using words like brilliant, brave, and clever to describe their own gender. They're more likely to attribute it to boys, which is painfully sad when you think about it, and that's at the age of 6. I think that there's a fair amount of work that can be done within secondary schools to try at a very early stage, and this is where I'm going to start talking about the Scottish education system because it's all I know. But at kind of first year level, but also in early years, in the later years in primary school, the reality is you probably need to get there by the age of about 10, 11 to start getting them to think about a different path getting them to think about coming out of a box of gender stereotyping and opening up access to opportunity for them. But what I will say, and what is really critical here, is single intervention doesn't work, right? And we see this time and time again. I see it with industry, I see it with universities and colleges, that we went to this school, we did X, but we don't have any new applicants. We don't have an increase in applications. One intervention done for that 1 year, for that 1 hour when you did an assembly, or you brought them on to, make robots or whatever it might be into your computer lab, isn't going to take away what has already been a lifetime of gender stereotyping, and then potentially the conversations that go back into gender bias after you've had that intervention. What has been proven to work is multiple interventions over a number of years. So an intervention in primary 7, an intervention in their first year of high school, an intervention in second year of high school, then you see some change in what options are taken up. So single intervention tends to be high-level investment as one-offs. I would say that that investment over 2 or 3 interventions for the same age group as they grow gives you much better results. So I'm desperately pushing universities and colleges away from single intervention. It will read well and it'll give you a good case study and some good quotes. It won't make impactful change.
Hello, Nico from Goldsmiths, University of London. Thank you for your talk. Sounds like all the work that Equate Scotland have done is brilliant, so thank you for doing that. It was interesting you were talking about intersectionality, and I was wondering how you think class and poverty intersects with that, which I think is a topic that is often ignored, especially when we talk about these easy-to-ignore groups. That's definitely one of them.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then there's the intersections within intersections, which is people of colour being more likely to be from poor backgrounds, disabled people locked into poverty. Absolutely. I think we do need to have a very honest conversation about class. It sometimes gets ignored because it's not a protected characteristic. So it's not talked about because it's not in the legislation as such. But I think given the fact that compared to a lot of the industries, and I say this I say this in a very genuine way, given the fact that I am working with construction companies and engineering companies, this sector is so far ahead compared to some of the conversations I'm having. I have to have conversations where I have to remind them to have women's toilets on a construction site. That's the level of conversations that I'm having. So this is a thrill to me. These questions are a thrill to me. But because we as a sector are so advanced in understanding the protected characteristics, there's nothing to stop us from going further than what's on a legislation and a piece of paper in the Equalities Act. And I think it's something that we can do. I think it's something that we have a dedication to doing through widening access work. I think that's the entire point of it. But I think an intersectional approach to widening access work would get us deeper and making impact faster, if that makes sense.
Any further questions for Talat? Because otherwise I have one. Talat, I was going to ask you about the gender action plans in Scotland. Obviously that's a driver in Scotland. Do you think it's worked, and do you think the rest of the country would benefit from something like that?
Okay. So it's only 18 months in. I can't tell you if it's worked yet. What I can tell you is that there is I think there's been a reinvigorating of the issue, because I think it's very easy to go, we've been talking about gender for a really long time, we're done now. And that's quite dangerous, because I think people then think job is done because we're all talking about it. But talking about it doesn't mean we're doing something about it. It means we're just talking about it, right? So I think it's reinvigorated people around gender, and I think that's been really necessary. It has explicit targets in it. I'm a fan of targets. I like something clear that I can then hold people to account over. So I think that has been impactful. I think it will take a few years before we see whether there has been change and impact. We've not even had the next set of data yet to be able to tell us whether there has been an increase when men taking nursing or women taking engineering. I do think it's something that the whole of the UK should consider. I do think there's space for that. But what really matters is the implementation, the guidance and the support to do it well. Just handing over a target, just handing over a plan doesn't work. It needs to come with an investment in the sector on how to do it well. Otherwise, it is just another bureaucratic form that needs to be filled in, data that needs to be collected. It actually needs investment and guidance and support. Okay. Can I go now? Okay.
Thank you, Talat. So, thank you very much, Talat, for that. Could we all thank Talat, please?